Hello friends! Have you ever spent hours perfecting a miniature, every shadow, every highlight carefully placed, only to look at the base and feel like something's missing? Or maybe you're working on a piece of terrain, and although the structure is solid, the color's right, it all still feels a bit too clean, too uniform, not quite alive. Well, that's where today's technique comes in. We're going to talk about one of the most powerful and strangely overlooked ways to bring your scenes to life: painting lichens. Lichens exist in an astonishing range of forms, from soft greys to deep greens, yellows, and even fiery reds. Each one a symbiotic organism, growing quietly and shaped by its natural environment. They are a superb tool, since they offer you the context and freedom to explore vibrant colors, experiment with surfaces and textures, and to play with different tone combinations. All this while keeping your scene natural and realistic. The first thing to consider is that lichens don't grow isolated. They spread in patches, creating clusters and auras over a surface. Let's look a bit deeper at how this technique works and how we can mimic lichen growth using paints, and with one special extra tweak that you may find surprising. So, before you even start, make sure you have that rock, branch or terrain wall fully painted and highlighted. Lichens are always a final step. Think of them as something living on top of a surface, and not part of it. This is actually an advantage, since you can add the lichens as an extra layer, an independent step that can completely transform a surface. Once you've picked a color, start with a darker variant of that tone, and add it over the surface to define the full area where the lichen will grow. Think of this as mapping out its overall spread. At its core, this technique is about building up layers of tiny dots in gradual tones, using the stippling technique to create a texture. Aim to keep the corners of these areas softer and more faded. You can do that by working with drier paint, using a cardboard to dry it on the brush, and applying it in a light, controlled stippling motion. This creates a subtle transition, as if the lichen is trying to spread itself across the remaining surface. With that first layer established, we can now start bringing the lichen to life, gradually building it up with lighter tones. Add white to the former color, or make it more vibrant by mixing different paints. With all these tone variations, add tiny dots of paint, creating a clustered, rich and rugged texture. You'll want to approach this a bit differently from standard highlighting. Don't focus on edges. Instead, paint the lichen across the object's surface independently from its shape. This means that inside that lichen patch, you should feel everything: crevices, cracks, and uneven areas as well. Covering those spaces in a different method will cause a visual rupture, the highlighted object versus the lichen patch, prompting the effect of something independent growing over a surface. Contrary to almost all miniature painting techniques, here we want to be adding thick layers of paint as a goal. That's why I don't use a wet palette for this. Instead, use a flat tile or a cardboard, allowing the paint to dry faster and become rougher, to apply the paint in thicker dots. An effort to try and build a rugged patch on top of the cleaner original surface, simulating that natural crust of lichens. Aim to be micro-precise when painting the dots, and to keep overlapping the layers of paint. If you are painting multiple colors, try to keep overall separate clusters that gradually mix together, rather than just random dots spread out evenly. For each of these main colors, add various hues, and feel free to mix them together too, employing middle tones as a bridge between them. Now this is where it becomes really fun, since there is no specific rule and realistic lichens can look extremely varied and individual. Remember, it really helps to see images of real-life lichens, to draw inspiration from, and to help you decide on color combinations and patterns. So, experiment with the tones. Go back and forth on the color mix. Add contrasting tones. Go wild with all the combinations. The further you push the effect, adding variation and complexity, the more authentic and eye-catching it will look in the end. With the painted lichens complete, we can now move on to that extra step I mentioned earlier. Up to this point, we've been recreating the flatter, crust-like forms of lichen. But many species also develop more prominent structures, small leaf-like and shrubby growths. These are known as foliose and fruticose lichens. Some rise in layered leafy formations, while others bear delicate branching shapes that can even hang from where they cling to. Now, at our miniature tabletop scale, these details become incredibly subtle, but we can still suggest them surprisingly well. And the solution is actually very simple. Tiny 1mm tufts work perfectly for this. By placing just a few of them within the core of your painted lichens, you can mimic those larger shapes and instantly add more depth and realism to the whole effect. The tiny pale teal tufts, for example, are excellent for recreating pale green and even bluish lichens, mimicking species like the common green shield. And just like all lichens, these types also come in an immense array of colors. So, aim to combine this technique with the painted lichens to create the most astonishing textures and colors for your bases and scenarios. Try out this technique and make your scenarios feel alive. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.